is entitled The Rise of Surgery 4.0 in the Digital Health Landscape. So I've been joined by 5 at the moment, but hopefully will be 6 experts drawn from different areas related to digital surgery. And perhaps for efficiency, I will do the honors and introduce the speakers just to save time. So perhaps speakers, I know your names on the screen. Perhaps you could just raise a hand when I introduce you. So first of all, we've got Dan Gilpin. So Dan is a consultant anaesthetist at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. He's also a Topol digital fellow, and he's playing an increasing role as a regional advisor for Health Education England on all things digital. We've got Adrian Hall. Adrian is the founder and MD of Brandon Medical. So they're a medical device manufacturer based in Leeds and specializing in operating room equipment. We've got Professor Naeem Sumro. He's Professor of Surgery and a consultant urologist at the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle. And importantly for the discussions this morning, he's actually a leading figure within the robotics group at the Royal College of Surgeons of England. We've got David King. David delivered the keynote this morning. Great lecture, David. He's a senior engineer at the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, AMRC, in Sheffield. He works predominantly within the health tech division and is interested in very much in how we bring innovation from manufacturing into surgery and Surgery 4.0. We've got Ryan Matthews, my colleague at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. Ryan is a consultant neurosurgeon. He has numerous interests, but for purposes of today, we'd like to pick his brains as clinical director for the Centre for Immersive Technologies at the University of Leeds. And then finally, we've got Professor Alex Frengi. Alex holds a chair in computer vision and is a Royal Academy of Engineering chair in emerging technologies with interests in silico trials and regulatory sciences. So David, perhaps I could begin with yourself. Lovely lecture this morning, really condensed what digital surgery and Surgery 4.0 is all about. Perhaps to just get us all on the same page, could you just tell us what the real take-home messages from your lecture were this morning?
Yes, so I mean, the standout thing for me is if you like, the parallels between something we've been working on for a number of years in manufacturing and Industry 4.0, and trying to bring the thoughts and the technology from that, and kind of trying to adapt that to very similar problems within Surgery 4.0. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do there to kind of transfer this knowledge and this technology, and essentially get some very quick wins, I think, within Surgery 4.0.
So you outlined the 4 or 5 big technologies that you think are really going to make a difference. Could you just remind us what they were?
Yes, so this kind of aligns very much with the Royal College of Surgeons Future of Surgery report, and essentially additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing will enable personalized implants, will enable bespoke prosthetics, and actually could change where manufacturing takes place. You know, you could potentially move it closer to the hospitals. There's potential there with that. But robotics and automation, essentially looking at increased use of robotics. We can kind of imagine an increased use of surgeon and robot cooperation with robotics. With virtual and augmented reality, really has got applicability across the whole pathway of training surgeons, informing patients, actually improving data visualization within surgery, and actually improving post-surgery care of patients as well. So there's huge potential with VR and AR. And as I kind of mentioned, all this kind of comes together with data and data science. So ultimately, Internet of Things, machine learning and AI kind of will kind of be gathering data from all these different areas across the whole of Surgery 4.0, really.
Great, thank you. I should have asked the audience. We really want this to be an interactive session rather than just a conversation between those on the screen. So please, can you post up any ideas or thoughts, and we will, very much give you the opportunity. This has to be interactive. So Dan, if I turn to you next, as a consultant practicing anaesthetist, you're very much at the interface of where patient care and digital technologies collide. Where do you think the big wins will come from in the future, and what do we need to do to make that happen?
Yeah, thanks. So as an anaesthetist, I see patients pre, peri, post-op. We see the issues with data. We were just saying about the concept of I'm a data scientist as an anaesthetist. I collect data, I use data to improve patient outcomes, and at the moment I don't have that data freely available. My aim with all of this is to look at how we can start to integrate pre, peri, and post-op data to directly and then indirectly improve patient outcomes. But to do that, we need an entirely new data infrastructure. And my vision is that the patient and the environment can start to plug into this infrastructure at different points on the patient journey, whether that's in hospital or out of hospital, pre and post surgery. And I think that, say, if we take pre-surgery, that can involve patient wearable data, pre-operative data from their own devices or devices that we give them from the hospital. And that would all allow personalized discussions about pre-optimization, about consent, and also use that pre-operative data for indirect improvements later using machine learning, using predictive analysis. But the idea is that you don't have separate layers of data, that you can then access this same data layer throughout the patient journey, so on the wards, in theatres, machines, waveform data, physiological data feeding into this same data layer, and also start to integrate sensor data from the fabric of the buildings, all being captured automatically, and they can be used directly with the patient care, so to improve what I can do for patients in theatre to optimize them, but also that big data being used later for analysis, and then that analysis data being plowed back into machine learning and AI prediction for those patients going through. And then using post-op data, so using, again, sending patients home with wearables, sending to the intensive care units, all accessing this same data layer, collecting, storing, analyzing, and then using that data for improvement later on. The deficiencies in that are massive. We don't have that sort of ability to capture data in that sort of scale at the moment. We don't have machines, equipment that talk to each other effectively. We have shared algorithms that are often closed. The standards that machines use to communicate are often closed. The technology is closed. I think when we're looking for industry to make this technology, it needs to be open from the beginning. It needs to be interoperable from the beginning. And that includes the data layers that we use need to be open and interoperable and expandable for the future. And that may involve some standard setting for the actual data collection that we take, as well as the way that we get machines. So my vision is this much wider way of collecting data. And I think it has those sort of direct, immediate impacts, but also the massive benefits of collecting data for the future.
Thanks, Dan. So That's a great vision. There must be people in the audience who have examples of perhaps solutions or areas where they're working. We'd love to hear that in the chat. So please post your thoughts. Naeem, perhaps I could turn to you because you've been trying to address this issue of data collection around robotics. Perhaps you could tell us what you've been doing in that space.
Thank you, David. As you know, the work that we are undertaking is a continuation of the work undertaken by Future of Surgery, by the RCS Commission on Future of Surgery. We are working on the challenge that we face as a surgeon are that 1/3 of all patients who go to an elective care hospital in the UK, there's about 10 million patients each year are for a surgical procedure. And sadly, 1/3 of all patients who die in UK die within 90 days after a surgical procedure. So we are trying to find out how we can improve outcomes and reduce harm patient undergoing surgery in the UK. We have known since the last 40 years that you don't have to cut patients open to do a good operation, say in bowel surgery, cholecystectomy, lung cancer, or uterine cancer. But sadly, now almost half the patients who have these kinds of cancer are still having open operations. So far as much that even patients having cholecystectomy, 40% are still having open operations. That is very pertinent within current situation that we need more hospital beds and more patients to go through. Our patients who have an open operation stays 3 times longer on a hospital bed the patient who doesn't have an open operation, and has more cost and more complication than he doesn't have. We have tried conventional means of not doing open operation for the last 30 years. We have not been successful. And I think robotics come over here to upscale that opportunity. Like industry, we want to actually move from 40 to 60% current adoption of MIS to 98%, like in prostate cancer surgery or kidney cancer surgery, which has already been achieved. The question is, can we deploy robotics to increase the day case rate for hernia repairs, for cholecystectomy, and decrease the length of stay from 7 days to 2 days in all the other cancers? So that's a challenge we are trying to see. But we were going even further than that. We think robots, not only that they are good mechanical implements to improve outcomes, but they also passively create data which can be used and aligned with other data sets to make predictions in terms of if somebody is a trained surgeon versus a trainee, and we can actually use those metrics, what we call automated performance metrics. These are all the gesture, the surgeon hand movements, eye movements surgeon uses. And we are currently undertaking a major international trial under auspices of RCS called Mastery Trial, which we are going to capture data across 6 surgical specialties in 600 patients in UK. And this is the first trial of its kind. And that will become the basis on which we can undertake further studies and make algorithms to see whether we can make predictions about outcomes of surgery, not in one particular procedure, but across all. And going forward, which Dan was saying, we want to align that dynamic data sets to the static data set, whether it's EHR, prehabilitation, or rehabilitation data sets, to make predictions and mitigate outcomes, adverse outcomes. So ultimately, the aim is that actually it comes in more than a mechanical implement to a digital implement. Thank you.
Thanks, Naeem. I'm going to have to turn to Adrian now before the smoke starts coming out of his ears. I can tell he's absolutely itching to get in, probably with replies to both Dan and Naeem. So the challenge for you, Adrian, is actually to get someone from the audience to put something in the chat. Can you excite the audience for us, please?
Yeah, maybe I'll try not to do that by being too controversial. Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, what tremendously exciting ideas that we have here. Why is Dan frustrated that he can't actually access the data that he desperately wants? Why is Naeem can't get the data that he has actually out into a more useful audience? And the truth, as Dan absolutely said, is that we don't have what he referred to as a data layer. We don't have the basic connectivity in our environments. Our buildings are still essentially the same buildings that we built 20, 30 years ago with plumbing and electrics. They don't have, as part of our infrastructure, fiber optics and network connectivity. We sort of add those in later. So for me, the our interest in opportunity is to create smart built environments, so in this room here, all the equipment that's behind me would traditionally just have been a piece of equipment you bolted to the building, whereas now actually the equipment that we're trying to create is equipment that has built in from the beginning sensors and communications, devices where you can basically gather information and parse it and interpret it within the room before you pass it on. A bit like your phone is doing to you every time you order a taxi or eat something, or every time Tesco's, you buy something from Tesco's. Club Card is analysing your activities and then telling Tesco's, to send you an advert for, well, he's just run out of custard creams, send him an offer for some new custard creams. We need to be taking those technologies, as David King said, these are technologies that are developed in industry and elsewhere, and actually taking them, seeing how we use them in this environment. And so one of the barriers that we see is that lack of the data layer and that last meter of connectivity. If we can, people like us can build that environment that actually, when you wheel a machine into, one of my operating theatres, we can pick up the output from that vital signs machine or ventilator and actually take it into the environment and make that available to Dan and his team and to cloud computing to do some big data crunching about why do we always have a problem on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. There's the pattern there. Let's go find out what that pattern is. The other barrier that we see is actually a separation between what I call the clinical world and the built environment world. So lots of this stuff that behind me, basically all the white stuff, is sold to people like David, to clinicians, and the medtech industry wants to come and sell to the clinicians in the hospital. Actually, that world is not great at actually interacting with the built environment. It doesn't go and sell to the people building the rooms that they go into. Similarly, the people who build buildings are actually a bit nervous of your workplace. They think operating theatres are scary places because they don't know them. So we basically see technologies that are, actually develop in isolation and aren't naturally passing information. So we can get information from, maybe some ECG traces and take that into the electronic patient record. That's a clinical world. Actually, the oxygen system is built into the building, and actually, bizarrely, the information from the system delivering oxygen actually into the patient in the operating theatre, which the last time I noticed is pretty important. Actually, the alarms on that won't be connected to the patient record. And what we need to do is bring these two worlds together to create what I'd started calling an enhanced patient record, which basically, what is the temperature in the room? Was there any faults on the electrical systems, the oxygen systems? How noisy is the room? And how many movements, as Naeem said, is the surgeon making? And you might think, well, why do I want to know that? Because actually, if you look at those, we can then use things like big data to determine what an expert environment looks like and what an improver environment looks like. So what does Professor Jane's team, when he's doing robotic surgery, and Naeem's teams look like? And how does that compare to somebody that needs, a team that perhaps needs some more support? So what we know is actually the novice environment is likely to be noisier with more movements, whereas those practice experts like David and Naeem are basically going to be making a certain number of planned movements and much more deliberate activity because they know what they're doing. So if we can recognize that, we can pull that up, and we can work out where there's opportunities to allow our teams to identify teams that need more support, and actually where we can improve and where we can predict, well, actually, here's a team that we might have concern about. And I know that's a key interest for the Royal Society. So, essentially where we are is trying to, a little bit of the glue that actually sticks all of these debates and environments together. It's very exciting.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. Some really exciting thoughts there, but you've failed. You've failed to generate a question. I don't know what we have to do. The tension's mounting. Who's going to get the first question? Ryan, I'm going to come to you. Can you do any better? Adrian touched on this novice and expert area. This is something that interests you, I know, around immersive technologies. Perhaps you could tell us about their role in this digital surgical world.
Yeah, thanks, David. And really interesting to hear everything you're saying. It's interesting how we talk about the rise of surgery 4.0, but David King, you mentioned, so we have additive manufacturing in our unit, and all of our intracranial implants are made with additive manufacturing on site in our hospital. So all of this stuff is happening right now. And the same with immersive technologies. So our training model and our pre-op planning model is, you know, an attrition. It's an apprenticeship. We just repeat the same things over and over again. And I think where the opportunities lie for immersive technology, and I'm going to put a question to the audience that I want to hear back from, somebody's got to hear back from, is to say, how do we deploy? So think about, how do we deploy in your clinical busy environment what I'm just about to pose, which is that every surgeon, master surgeon or apprentice, is analyzed with big data according to their training needs in an immersive environment. And then the training is guided around actually the bits they need to learn. So rather than repeating whole operations, if it's only part of it that they need to learn, the kind of smart bit of immersive environments is we can pick up quickly which bits people need to learn. And they just repeat those bits again. So when they get to clinical practice, they are focused in their training, and the upskill is focused around their training needs. But I think the big challenge is how we actually get, you know, we're all an interested audience. We love technology. We see the potential for this. I have 21 other consultants in my department. How do I get them to engage with this process? And I'd really like to ask the audience for any thoughts or ideas. Come on, make me a winner. Make me, you know, get that question on there, and somebody pose how we get the average consultant who has no interest in technology to engage with this kind of technology. So how do I get one of my colleagues to put a headset on, analyze their practice, and determine what they might improve? Ideas in this box.
So thank you very much, Ryan. Have you hit the video button or something? We can't see you any longer. You disappeared. Oh. So that's great. Let's hope our audience can respond to that challenging question. I guess it's, you know, it's something to do with the fear of being analyzed, isn't it? People are worried about their performance being analyzed and what it might mean for them, where it might go. So it involves a sort of culture change as well. Yeah. So Alex, I'm going to turn to you. Can you just pip Ryan to the post and get the first?
I've won a question.
You've got a question. Let me see. Okay, we'll come back to you, Alex. Ryan has got 2 questions. You've got to get 3. So tell us about the work you do in silico trials and how this fits into the digital world.
Yeah, so I need to say that most of the things that have been said are actually quite exciting and in one way or another linked to the idea of in silico trial. But just to start with David King's talk, which I also thought was fantastic, and we need to follow up definitely. I have a slide somewhere where I actually say, look, if we look at the automotive industry, which is one of those that David was referring to in manufacturing, and you look at cars in, say, 30 years ago, and you look at the Teslas and the cars today, there is a massive change in the product, the final product. But also, if you look at the process by which we develop those cars, is fundamentally different. David made a good point today, and he was underpinning the importance of these more integrated assets, so the cyber physical layer, which I think is the one that Adrian was alluding that is missing in the context of healthcare. But then there are the interesting things like this Internet of Things, more things connected. So this would be the Internet of Medical Things. So all these different digital assets. And then the big data, which is basically being able to exploit that information that comes. And Adrian and Dan made very good examples, and Naeem as well, on different areas of that. So my work in silico trials is yet another domain of those. If we imagine we had the possibility to have all the imaging that is collected in, Leeds, so in the north of the region of Leeds and in the north of the UK, this is probably about 17 million people that we would have imaging from all the image examinations that we do. And you could imagine that even if it's 1% of that population, that we would have imaging of some particular organ of interest, say the heart or the brain vessels or the brain, we could create with all of those digital models of the population. And in 1% of 17 million is a massive amount, more than any trial that we've seen being published. So the idea of in silico trials is being able to use, for instance, imaging to create anatomical models of different organs, utilize wearable sensors that we were talking before to create models of the physiological regime of those patients, but also, for instance, being able to take data, the one that Dan or Adrian or Naeem work, which is kind of the dynamics of the operating environment, so the different information about the surgeons manipulating a particular device during the insertion of the implantation of those. What we could do is essentially do virtual implantations of particular devices, stents, is one example, or heart valves is another example where I'm working on, and try to understand how that device will operate in that vast population that we have access to data. This is a way to assess and to analyze these devices in a much more thorough way than we can do at the moment in conventional trials. And it's much more akin of the things that David King was saying today, that we do in the automotive industry, where we tend not to do physical wind tunnels as often as we used to, because we can do that through simulations. We don't need to do crash tests so often because we can do that through simulation as well. We don't need to do a lot of physical prototyping because we can have virtual reality to prototype things, and we're incorporating AI in the driving as well. So, and I like the way that David put it as well, because that has impact not just in healthcare, but potentially in the net zero by reducing waste for prototyping, the lengthy process and the cost of those, but also will improve healthcare considerably, because not only the risk in the sense of being able to test the devices in much larger populations, but also the cost of R&D to go from the idea to a prototype. You will still need to have pivotal trials at some point, because you will want at some point to go to real humans. But the idea is that you could do that only when you have sufficient digital evidence that the likelihood of proceeding and then having a major problem, is reduced compared to the likelihood of being successful. So it's a way to reduce, refine, replace conventional trials rather than, putting them completely aside. I think you will still need them. And we will still need, the access to real world data. The thing is, we're spending now, £400 or £500, for instance, to do an examination, a CT scan or a cardiac scan. We compute a few numbers from it, and then we pretty much store it. And how much of the data that you then are collecting actually is utilized to take decisions from. So we're only really using a very little proportion of the investment that as a healthcare system we're putting in every patient, in every procedure. And I think that's what the automotive industry, the aerospace industry has realized long ago. And they are saying, well, now one point that you made, David and Jane, that I think made me think as well, is that the differences in the automotive industry and the manufacturing industry, we're not evaluating clinicians, we're evaluating a production system. But it would be useful to know whether there is some learnings, because someone is in that production chain, so there is a human as well at some point. How has been the uptake there, and can we learn from that sector ways to engage with clinicians, very much the same way that the manufacturing industry had to engage with people in the manufacturing chains, right? Because there is a bit of evaluation going on there inevitably as well on the human, human contributors. Anyway,
Thanks, Alex. Now, having called for questions and got them, we have to engage with it. So we've got a question. I'm going to put this to Dan. Actually, I think this is probably your area. Could the problem with engaging with technology be related to the individual trust's attitude to technology? The NHS doesn't always come across as hungry for technology.
Yes, I think that's probably true anywhere within the NHS, not any individual trust. I think what we've seen over the last few years with, although I'm saying NHSX and NHSD, they have just probably been replaced in the last 2 days to probably going into NHS E&I. But the idea of the NHSX vision was to give a vision across the NHS of interoperability and how technologies can be implemented. I think leaving these to individual trusts to implement is wrong. I don't think that's the way forward. And I think the attitude to often within trusts is to maintain their status quo and not go too far down big new innovative routes. And I think that's the role of NHS E&I and other type of bodies to give the directions. And that's where they've been going over the last few years, is really this push to interoperability, the push to data, the push to use of that. So I think it is a barrier. And every time I work locally, you do tend to get quite a bit barriers, because it's not really the attitude, but it's the resources, the capacity. Most trusts are at about their limit with digital IT systems, just to maintain the status quo. And that's where industry, where the wider vision of NHSX or NHS E&I comes.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I want to pick up with Naeem now, this issue about reducing variability. We know that, surgical care is tremendously variable across the NHS. So perhaps you could give us your thoughts, Naeem, about how we reduce that variability and drive the whole level up. And then perhaps I can ask Adrian to respond from an industry perspective on that. And also, Adrian, perhaps you could pick up this, the human interface that Alex raised. You've got all this kit. How do you go about, the human interaction and not scaring people with it? So if I come to you, Naeem, first, can you tell us a little bit about surgical variability?
Yes, thank you. I think in this digital world, surgery is still an analog process. So it's based on what surgeon does in a theater and writes 2 sentences, the surgery went well. And that's actually what happened. So we want to move away from that analog. And that's how we train surgeons as well. At the end of the training, we say, how many cases did you do? How many cases were you supported by a senior surgeon? There is no objective assessment. What robotics allows us to do, that we can break down each procedure into multiple steps, and we can actually individually measure those competencies with APMs and everything to say whether the person has achieved competencies. That is how I think trainee should have in future video diary along with the diary of the numbers, and each procedure and sub-procedure can be seen. And then if there is any deficiency in a particular area, that can be worked on. That is about how we train surgical workforce differently. In terms of outcomes as well, I think what robotics allows to do, that it allows us to scale up minimally invasive surgery to 90-95%. And by doing that consistently across the country, we'll actually have patients which will stay fewer days in hospital, will have less, 1/3 or 2/3 less complications, and the outcome different. But other than that, we can actually capture surgical data from that particular theater. And along with anesthetic data, we can create a digital signature of each individual procedure. And Alex was saying that if there are 10 million procedures each year, we can develop digital twins of multiple ways, say a hip replacement might go in that particular person. And if there's a variation, and there was a suggestion for David King about maintenance, stress, we can actually see in any pathway where the person is going off peak in that particular pathway. We can improve that pathway and improve outcomes.
So, Adrian, how is industry going to help us achieve this?
Well, industry, if it's left to its own devices, will basically react to the business model that we're given. And in a vacuum, we'll build our equipment. And that's why we have this equipment that doesn't talk to each other, because each individual company is making sense of the world in its own way. And you can't blame companies or industry for that, because in the absence of any leadership or direction, that's how those businesses survive. So listening to the information that actually the equipment that Naeem's using is creating fantastic information that's useful, but it's not made accessible because the providers of the robotic systems, basically there's nothing to drive them to have that information shared. So there's two things that we could do. David mentioned that we can actually start setting standards to say that actually the equipment that comes into these environments must have open data systems. That data must be designed to be shared, not to become a fiefdom of one individual company. And NHS and other healthcare systems around the world can actually start to think about that. Traditionally, that's very slow. The faster thing is actually to create business models which encourage this. So we think about the phones that we carry and the app stores that have been created. What was created there is a business model where other people can basically come and bring their products as, in that case, pieces of software, and you can sell it, and actually you can access users through the Apple Store or the Android Store. And the NHS could be actually trying to create environments that encourage industry to actually bring their products into a business model, because the NHS has thousands and thousands of clinicians who want to use these products, and this is part of what has been said about some of the leadership that is now just being created. That is incredibly powerful. In the same way, COP26 has engaged finance and business to start driving environmental change and accelerating environmental change. So industry wants to create new products. Industry wants to create new environments, but we also need some leadership from you as our users. Otherwise, we can't help just make sense of the world in our own sense, and that leads to isolation. So I'm not sure if that's quite the answer that you maybe wanted, David, but basically, the answer is industry is here to innovate, but we need to start drawing out roadmaps, but that go beyond the end of our nose and the immediacy of today's problems. We have to start thinking about 10-year roadmaps about how we're going to start to converge systems and data. And then once that data is available, as everybody in this panel has said, there's an endless opportunity of things that we can draw out of that to spot experts and novices, to make big data inferences about why somebody always has a worse clinical outcome in this set of circumstances. So I don't know, that maybe addresses some of what you're asking there, David.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Ryan, it looks as though you may have won the chat competition. It's still open, but you did dodge my question. So I'm going to come back to you, and I want a proper answer this time. Where is AR and VR going to fit into this digital world? Give us some specifics.
So being specific, I think, as Dan said, the real opportunity pre, intra, and post-op. So pre-operatively, this is about warm-up, rehearsal, and preoperative planning. So I already use mixed reality Magic Leap headsets with our neuronavigation software to preoperatively plan. And this draws in the data of the tumor, its relationship to tractography, its relationship to vital structures. And I'm just doing this in my office. So it's plug and play. Do it in the office. The bandwidth is sufficient. I noticed Toby, who is one of our collaborators, has also asked a question about insufficient bandwidth. I think that's a really important question in immersive technology, because we rely on the bandwidth to wirelessly stream very high resolution images. And that is really important. Working with IT in any trust to kind of implement that is important. So tips would be find There are secret bandwidth channels within trusts that are not open to either the general clinical population or the public. It's about tapping into those for these high resolution technologies. So that's preoperatively. There's also an opportunity to educate our patients. We take patients off the street and ask them to understand complex pathologies such as brain tumors. Actually, if you just show them where in their brain the tumor is in an extended reality environment, suddenly all becomes clear why I'm so worried about their speech or motor function. Intraoperatively, there's a real opportunity for low fidelity technologies. So we wheel in £1 million machine that takes 20 minutes setup to show me where to put the cut on the head. I can put a headset on, register that with the patient, and have the cut on the head in under 5 minutes. There's huge economies of scale there that probably gets me another case done in theatre, and the business case is a no-brainer, no pun intended. Post-operatively, there are some real opportunities to analyze training, as we've talked about, so we can capture analytics, eye tracking, we can capture kind of economies of movement. These headsets have really high fidelity cameras built in that can analyze that and then feed back to the patient, to the clinician, the surgeon, what about their performance. And then the last thing I'd say is in rehabilitation. So specifically, lots of our patients sit in NHS hospitals with very limited resources with respect to physiotherapy and occupational therapy. Put a headset on, they get an immersive environment that's completely safe because there are no physical tools that will harm them, and they can actually enhance their rehabilitation chances and get out of hospital faster, which is what everybody wants. And we have a master's project looking at that.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for answering Toby's question. We've got 1 minute to go. So Alex, I'm going to set you the challenge in 1 minute to tell us how we pull this whole community together and take it forwards.
So I think I answered to Toby in the chat. Something that I think we need to do is, if we were able to put together this vision of both new services, new trials, new ways to evaluate healthcare, and at the same time, why it's important to build these digital highways and digital connectivity, and may realize that this is not something the NHS has the infrastructure at the moment. Those roads need to be built digitally, and that connectivity needs to be built. And this underpins basically everything else we've been discussing. So it's about pulling this community, but also, voicing the concerns locally to our regions and to government for that investment going to NHS to build those digital roads. And these are not just digital roads between hospitals, but I think what we heard from Al, from Adrian, from Dan, from Naeem, is there are digital, let's say, roads within the hospital, within the different services and systems that currently exist as well. Okay, Alex, I think you did a great job. You did a great job of summing up there. We're now at our time. All that's left for me to do is to thank all our experts on the panel for giving up their time. It's been really great. We could have gone on for another hour and a half, I'm sure, chatting about this. So thank you very much to all our participants and our panel. We now have to return to, I think we go to the expo area, and then there's another keynote which will be on the main stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.